Thank you. Ruby actually joined us a couple weeks ago, and she has a project for her school as an internship to um, kind of kick off her own research study. And she's a nutrition major, so that's kind of where this whole idea came to be. And before I take away her spotlight, I'm going to hand it over to her.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Ruby. I'm a sophomore at University of Washington in Seattle, majoring in food systems, nutrition, and health with a minor in data science. So I'm here today as a new intern for Genetic Alliance to talk about this project that I'm super excited to be leading. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can someone confirm that they can see that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Want to make sure. Okay, so just to start out, just the basic overview of the project. The goal of it is to establish a connection between diet and exercise and specific manifestations of PXE. And the reason for that is really to help people with PXE gain like more thorough understanding of how their diet can impact their health specifically. And I do want to clarify that this study is all about measuring holistic health and how you feel in your body, not as a weight loss. Like that's not how we're going to be measuring this at all. It's a lot more about how you feel and making sure that we can measure the trajectory of how you feel in your body in relation to your diet. Okay. So pretty simple qualifications for joining the project. Really just want people who are interested in this topic of nutrition. And if you are open to switching up your diet a little bit, we're going to hand out some materials that you can read about how to switch up your diet. And so we just want people who are open to implementing some of those changes. And then we're also going to ask all participants to complete a survey each week. That's really just giving the basics of essentially what you ate that week and how you're feeling. And right now we're recruiting people who have a PXE diagnosis, but are hoping to open that up to more people as well soon. Okay, so now details about what you would actually be doing if you're participating in this. So once you sign up, we're going to have everybody complete a primary survey, which is basically just getting a sense for how your health is right now and what your kind of regular diet is right now, just to get a starting point. And then we're going to distribute this information that you'll see in a couple of slides that is just giving kind of a basic or giving some strategies for how you can change your diet. And then you're going to take those suggestions and incorporate them however you want to into your own diet. And then over the course of the study, we'll ask everyone to complete a survey each week that has two components. So first is diet and exercise. And so that's going to be measured in how much fruits, vegetables, sugar, salt, processed foods, that kind of stuff you eat. And then the health portion of it is basically just trying to get a sense of how you're feeling that week. So we're going to ask about if you have experienced nausea, dizziness, chest pain, shortness of breath, any, the kind of classic things like that. And then we're going to encourage everybody to join a Google group because we really want everyone to be able to communicate with each other throughout the project. So that way in that group, like if you were having trouble implementing one of the specific sections of the information that we give you, then you could ask for some recipe suggestions from other people or offer your own suggestions of recipes, and just kind of talk with everyone else to see how this is going for everyone, and encourage people to make sure that they've completed the survey each week, just in case you guys forget. And then throughout the study, anytime anybody, if you guys want to have some sort of one-on-one meeting, to ask questions or get recipes. And I'll also check the Google group and put in recipe suggestions of my own. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to meet one-on-one with anybody. And then the goal outcome of this is really for everybody to learn how diet can impact your own personal health. Okay, so getting into the specifics of the nutrition portion of it, this is really centered around the link between a heart healthy diet and symptoms of PXE. So we're going to be going based off of the American Heart Association's recommendations for diet, specifically for this heart healthy lifestyle. And so I'm just going to go into we've split it up into 10 components, 5 that you want to maximize and 5 to minimize, essentially, to keep it super simple. And so I'm going to go into those just to give a sense. Don't feel like you have to remember all of this. This is essentially the same information that we'll be distributing, but just want to get a jump on it right now. Okay, so first, as far as foods that you want to maximize. So I'm sure this isn't a revolutionary idea, but fruits, vegetables, whole grains, healthy proteins, and exercise. Just 5 things that everybody should incorporate. So these are just some suggestions because when people say you should have 2 or 3 servings of fruits, whole grains, whatever per day, it's kind of hard to get a sense of what that actually means about what a serving actually is. So this is just trying to simplify that so that everybody is kind of on the same page about what counts as a serving and how much you should be getting. So for fruits, 2 or more servings a day is recommended, which is a cup raw or cooked or half a cup dried. And I just included some suggestions of fruits and vegetables that are in season right now in case anyone is having trouble looking or finding those. For vegetables, also 2 servings a day, 1 cup raw or half a cup cooked. For exercise, usually exercise is split into low and high intensity. And so you either want to get 150 minutes of low intensity per week, not per day, or 45 minutes high intensity, or some combination. You can do half and half or whatever you'd like. Whole grains, this is specific to whole grains, not grains in general, because usually it's recommended that people get 6 to 11 servings of grains per day. And it's recommended that half of those be whole grains. And so there are some examples of what counts as 1 serving there. And then healthy proteins, which can be a little bit confusing to navigate because, most people think that, all proteins are healthy and are helping your body, which they are. But when you talk about healthy proteins specifically, it's an emphasis on lean proteins. So that's a lot of white meat, like chicken and turkey, tofu, shellfish, eggs, nuts, Greek yogurt, legumes, beans, lentils, that kind of stuff. And you really want to minimize as much as possible things like highly processed meats, like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, that kind of stuff. And then grain-fed red meats like beef, pork, lamb, and then high-fat dairy products are usually not quite as healthy. And with all of these things, we're not going to say like you have to cut anything completely out of your diet, just trying to encourage people to lean a little bit more toward these and away from the less healthy processed meats. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to go into the foods that, again, you don't want to cut out completely necessarily, but you do want to minimize as much as possible. So that's salt, sugar, processed food, alcohol, and cholesterol. So I've tried to include in this slide some specifics on, because if people say like avoid high salt products, it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to figure out what, like, I don't think that I could visualize what 2,300 milligrams of salt would actually look like, but you just want to kind of do your best to, when you can, choose lower sodium varieties of foods that you're already eating. Like, for example, canned vegetables have a much higher salt content than dried peas and beans and that kind of stuff. And then usually the more processed a food is, the more salt and sugar are added to it. So here are just some like basic overviews of the amounts that you should be aiming for. And in the surveys each week, it's not going to be a like, did you follow this exact like regiment to a T? It's going to be more of just getting a sense for how much you are eating of each of these categories, and then seeing if we can extrapolate some sort of connection between that and how you're feeling each week, and see if we can map a trajectory between those two. And so similarly, I have on the right here some examples of cholesterol high products and some examples of what you could replace those with. So notice we're not asking everyone this is not like a keto, no fat diet at all. However, dairy products, whole fat dairy usually does have higher cholesterol levels than lower fat dairy. Vegetable oil is a solid replacement for things like shortening. And again, the same way that processed foods have higher salt and sugar content, also usually has higher cholesterol. So getting fresh, unprocessed is usually a good safe bet on all of these fronts. And then on that same line of thought, the like more processed, more baked, more basically the more that is done to your food, the higher it's going to be in all of these things that you're wanting to cut down. And then for alcohol, this is the general recommendation for men and women on how many servings of alcohol you should be having, maximum. And then going over to processed foods, this can be a little bit tricky to nail down what exactly counts as a processed food. I've included a list here of probably the most obvious, basically anything that comes in a package is likely processed. So you just want to stay away from those as much as possible. And again, it's not about cutting these out entirely. It's much more about minimizing as much as possible and leaning more toward the first slide of the foods that you should choose. Okay, so that's the overview that I have. If anybody has any questions about specifics there, I'm happy to answer.
What about supplements?
Pretty clear.
About supplements? Yeah, so in general, some studies have shown that supplements don't have the same impact as getting the vitamins and minerals naturally. Because we're focusing more on what the American Heart Association has categorized as a heart healthy diet, there isn't a whole lot of emphasis on supplements or on specific like micronutrients and vitamins and minerals. Those are definitely super important components of your diet, but for this study specifically, it's going to be focusing more on those like 10 categories that were listed before.
How long do you expect the study to go on?
I don't know that I can answer that solidly. I might have to turn that over to Kat or Sharon.
So what I would say, can you guys hear me? Occasionally these ear things don't work very well. I would say that we'd like to go on as long as people have attention for it. We know that things like this can be hard to keep interest in, and so that's why Ruby will be offering the Google group, which works like our Google chat group. It'll be private. You guys will be subscribed to it. You can ignore it and just delete it. You can also not get it in your email if you don't like it. You can just read it on the web. There'll be lots of options. We'll help you with those. But there'll be a place to encourage each other. And so Seeing how long people have attention for this, when we start to get steep drop off, that sort of thing will be part of the decision-making process. We also will be offering one-on-one consultations with Ruby. And so we're hoping that you'll also have, be able to retain interest because of that. We expect at least, and Ruby, this is the part you can correct me if I'm wrong, at least for the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks, and then hopefully through the summer, so that we're into the fall with both a good bit of data for Ruby, because this is a project for her internship at the University of Washington, and also enough data to start to see, are we seeing any kinds of connections? I will say that I think we all know that it takes sometimes a pretty long time to see a connection between our general health and our diet. And so we want to give this enough time if we can. And so we want to figure out ways that we can encourage each other. The other thing I'll say is we have some preliminary evidence in animals that exercise and good diet actually is probably the best mitigator of the advance of PXE. And why I say that is we actually have a couple studies in mice who have exercised and horses that have exercised, believe it or not, that have shown that when those horses run a lot, 20 minutes a day, and when the mice run 20 minutes a day, and not all out running, so more like Ruby's describing for exercise, that their pyrophosphate levels are normally much higher than they are at rest. And that seems to boost the pyrophosphate level for the whole day. Theoretically, then, if individuals with PXE ate a good diet and exercised some minutes a day, and we don't know how many in humans, because humans are not horses and they're not mice, there would be some boost in the pyrophosphate levels of people with PXE. We know that the genes mutations cause low levels of PPI, pyrophosphate, in you guys. And so if you boost your own pyrophosphate level naturally, then it should slow PXE down. We also know that it takes a long time to show that PXE slowed down. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about in this project.
I have a question. Is there going to be blood work with this?
No,
Is
yeah,
there a way to measure, or how are we just going to measure subjectively on how we feel, or?
yeah. So the way that the data is going to be analyzed is essentially your own data is going to be compared to your own data in so we're going to try and track a trajectory within each person and compare that between diet and how you're feeling. So if you have a way to measure blood pressure, that's going to be the one thing that if you can offer that information, that would be great. If totally understandable that not everyone can do that. And so we still want to get all the other information from everybody else, but it is going to be more of a subjective, trying to remember how many times throughout the week you noticed negative health symptoms.
There's some questions and comments in the chat, Ruby, if you want to get to those too.
Yeah. Okay, about the question about prescriptions, I don't know too much about that. I could definitely look into specific prescriptions and how those affect absorption, because that would definitely make a difference. Yeah, once we have the everyone in the Google group, if anyone feels comfortable sharing that kind of information about prescriptions that you're on, I would be more than happy to look those up specifically and get back to you about how that might mean that tweaking the diet would help you.
The reason I asked the question about the supplements was, and I can't remember, was it a study, Sharon will certainly know, where they found that taking calcium indeed is not good for you. And I had been taking vitamin C that I realized was buffered by calcium. So,
Yeah. So there was no study, Dina. There was one researcher who decided to say that. And we've written probably 50 times that you should take all the C, D, calcium that you are prescribed by your doctor. And that, in fact, what we've noted is that a lot of PXEers listened to that one doctor and did this for decades and now have very severe osteoporosis, in addition to the calcium restriction not slowing PXE down. One of the issues here is that when the body doesn't have enough calcium, it leaches it from the bones. And there's been studies, for example, in nursing mothers in underserved areas of the world where they can't eat enough calcium. And so the body leaches the calcium from the bones and puts it in the milk for the baby. And the mother winds up very young with osteoporosis. So same thing here, blood levels of calcium stay very, very constant in humans. There's really no way to lower that. And it isn't, the problem in PXE is not calcium. The problem is that the pyrophosphate levels are too low, and that what pyrophosphate does is protect the body. All of us, everybody in any instance our bodies want to protect us by using calcium to repair tissue. And in the case of people with PXE, the pyrophosphate isn't there to balance out the protection of the tissue and the calcification. And so the calcification goes too far. So as Ruby said, for this study, we're not going to go anywhere near supplements because we actually don't know a lot about their interaction, except that everybody should be taking whatever their clinician, their doctor has suggested for them.
I mean, that's really good news, Sharon, but I must have imagined reading this recent, because, I've had this broken foot. So I was taking calcium with my vitamin C. And it was this year that I read it, and it's not like I've been doing any research. So I'm glad to hear I'm imagining it, because that's not shocking lately with me. But anyway, okay, that's good.
Yeah, and Dina, it's also possible that someone else has published again something. There's a lot. It's really phenomenal that there's probably now about 600 papers on PXE, and I'd say 50 of them are worth their salt. The rest are some people's one-person study. For a good example is when the kids got diagnosed, I read PXE leads to depression and suicide, for sure. What I found was one paper that a 13-year-old had committed suicide. She had been diagnosed with PXE, but what they didn't also say is her mother had just died, her father disappeared, she was in a foster home. I mean, there were a whole host of things that had a lot to do with her committing suicide. PXE did not cause suicide in her. Maybe it contributed to some sense about depression and so forth. But anyway, my point is there's lots of single case studies that really don't contribute to our understanding of the disease. So if you do find that paper, I'd love to see it, because what we try to do is then say, this paper is not right.
Who knows, maybe it'll surface again. I don't know, but it wasn't something I looked for on my own. I don't know. Anyway, thank you, Sharon. Also, is this the wrong time for you to talk about the recent message on, I guess it was a pyrophosphate trial that you said people would have to be tested? Do you know what I'm talking about? I was a little confused because there was a sentence that said you'd have to be tested every day for a week, and then also a month. It said in the same sentence, so I was a little confused.
Yeah, so I'll answer it briefly, because then we'll go back to just this study.
Sorry, Ruby.
So there are two studies coming up for PXE, both of them called phase 2 clinical trials. They are only to test whether or not there's detrimental effects from a drug. The first one is by a company called Inozyme, and they're using an enzyme replacement therapy called INZ-701. It's actually been designed for another disease, and they threw in PXE. They'll look at whether or not there's any detrimental effects from taking this drug. This drug is a subcutaneous injection, so it's like giving yourself insulin, or if you've ever seen anyone do that, or you do it yourself. And for the study, and I'm not going to remember this exactly, but for the first week, you have to stay at the clinical center all day for 8 hours after you do your injection. And then for the next up to 32 days, you have to stay near the clinical center, because you have to go several times a week for 8 hours to the clinical center. So anybody participating in the trial will either have to live near or move to London or New York City. Those are the two areas. A second trial by Daiichi Sankyo, which is a company that we've been working with a great deal. I'm a co-investigator on the study. Lots more involvement by PXE International. Will be a tablet that you will take. That one, the course of that study will be much shorter, and the involvement is 7 visits to the center. We hope to have 1 center in Massachusetts, 1 in the metropolitan New York area, 1 in the DC metropolitan area. For that one, you will not stay in the hospital. You'll go and get some baselines done. For those of you who are in the magnesium study, very similar. You'll get a whole bunch of baseline things done for the first visit. You probably would have a couple home visits from nurses to draw your blood and look at pyrophosphate levels. And then some other visits would also be at the hospital. And so that one will be 7 visits total, be much shorter, and it's a tablet that you'll be taking. That's using something called a TNAP inhibitor, which would boost levels of pyrophosphate and is in the pathway for PXE. The other one is actually targeting a different gene, and there's some perhaps side effect that will help people with PXE. So we don't know. Both of them are phase 2, so we really need to get to phase 3 to know whether or not there'll be some benefit for people with PXE.
Thank you.
So Ruby, Terry, good to see you, hear you anyway, says if you need somebody for a baseline for poor diet and no exercise, I'm your gal. We had a couple other people in the PXE chat the last few days say the same thing. And so maybe it might be good to mention, where people are at right now and where they might progress to during this trial, this study, and so forth.
Yeah, so honestly, that is great for this purpose. Yeah, we really want to get a wide variety of people, or people from a wide variety of diet and exercise levels right now, because essentially that's more room for growth and more room for possible like correlation between the trajectory of your diet and trajectory of your health. So in order to get a more like holistic understanding of how diet and PXE interact with each other, we want to have people of all different diet and exercise levels to start with. Yeah, so we can see how this affects everybody.
I have a question. I tend to not eat many grains just because I have a lot of food sensitivities. So I eat a lot of veggies, fresh veggies and fruit and some meat. So I'm wondering if that's like, I'm not like the best person for the study because I don't really follow the Heart Healthy Diet or the diet by the Heart Association.
Yeah, so that's honestly totally fine. That's why we're saying that it's not like you need to follow this exact diet 100% and stick to, 2 servings of vegetables, 3 servings of whole grains, like all of these specific things, because like everybody, diets like this are going to work differently for everybody's body. All we're asking is that you have some willingness to change your diet a little bit, to even if it's only in 1 or 2 categories within this, to get a little bit closer to what the American Heart Association is saying is ideal for a heart healthy diet. But you absolutely don't need to like follow it to a T 100%, especially if you have specific food sensitivities. And that's another thing that I think that the Google group is going to be great for, is if people feel comfortable sharing that kind of information. That way others can give specific suggestions for if you have allergies, sensitivities, anything like that. And I can also offer some more recipes that would be catered to you specifically. Okay. Sharon, I'm gonna let you take the first question.
So I'll speak about that at the end. I just put a note in there.
Okay, sounds good. So expecting to start, I don't know the exact date, hopefully in the next week or so, I think is what we're thinking as far as timeline goes. I'll let Kat or Sharon confirm that.
Yes, within the next week or so.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, that's an interesting point. We have been focusing mainly on what the American Heart Association has recommended. I did look a little bit at what other like the other international recommendations, and in general, they're all somewhat in agreement. You know, the specific serving sizes and that kind of stuff shifts a little bit depending on where you look. But it's not too far off. I can definitely look more into the specifics of different sorry. Sharon, can you, sorry, I just saw your message.
Yeah, so I think Carrie might be referring to the fact that in all the world, only the US uses and Britain use this measuring system that we do use. So for example, if we say you can have 4 ounces of alcohol, the rest of the world uses the metric system. And so will the documents be in both measures?
Right, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yeah, so I can, right now it's only in imperial, but I can definitely add the metric conversions. Yeah, to make that more accessible for everybody. Thank you, Sharon.
No worries. Any other questions? Because I'm going to shift us just a little. There'll still be some space for this. But what I want to talk about next is how we're going to have the questionnaire served up to you. Okay, so the questionnaires will be on our registry system. And so if you have not registered for our registry system, then we're going to ask you to do that. And that'll be clear in the instructions that you'll be given, because that's where you'll be registering for this study, so that we're not having you register in multiple places, so that we can also have your EHR connected to the study and so forth. So if you haven't registered, yeah, Luna is our registry system. Yep. We don't call it Luna. It's like saying our newsletter, and we don't call it MailChimp, we call it our newsletter. So the same thing with this, we happen to use Luna as our platform. So the PXE registry will be where we'll be directing you guys. I think that most of you, we've heard from now and then, and you've done the studies on the registry. This will be another study on the registry. So we'll look for you connecting to that through, and this will be the way that you'll register. We often give one-on-one tutoring around that if you want it, and Mary is your person for that. Kat, to some degree, Kat, you've begun doing some of that as well. So the two of them would take care of the technical logistical piece. Ruby will be taking care of the nutrition piece for this. And this will be a repeating survey. So you'll be taking the same survey every week, so it should be pretty simple. And Ruby, it's not very long, is that right?
No, not super long at all. Yeah, one thing that I just want to throw in there while you're talking about the specifics of each survey, just want to encourage people who decide to participate that if you find you're having trouble remembering, because since it's only a weekly survey, you know, if you fill out the survey on Sunday, you might, yeah, that comment is perfect. Yeah, just to, even if you're just like have a note open on just a piece of paper or on your phone or something, that you could just log like a reminder of what you ate for different meals, if you think that would help you remember at the end of the week to count up your servings, that would be great.
The other thing that we'd be happy to do is, we're definitely not going to create an app, but there are apps out there, as Carrie put in the chat. That's fine to use one of those. Or We can also just give you a simple scoring sheet that you can put a tick mark in a box. Ruby, you can make up something like that, right? So that people could print a new one on Sunday or Monday, whatever day you consider the week starting, and just tick the boxes.
Yeah, for sure. I can make a simple template for that.
The Google Groups, here's how a Google group works. Once you sign up, you have several choices that you can set. We will, by default, set them to come to your email. So you will get them, if any of you are in PXE chat, you've been receiving those chat messages from the other 200 people in chat via email for the most part. You can also decide that you don't want to receive those chats as they come out. And instead you want what's called a digest, and you can receive a daily digest or a weekly digest to your email. So in other words, you would get all the emails once a day or once a week. Not terribly good for chatting back and forth or feeling encouragement, I don't think, but you might want it that way. There are some people who don't like it in their email, and so they go to log into the website. If you log into your Google Groups with your Gmail or your email that's connected to Gmail, to Google, then you'll see all the groups you belong to, and this will be a new one. I think we named it, Mary, PXE Nutrition. Is that what we named it? Yeah. So at the start of this, once you sign up, we will add you to the Google group. You have lots of choices. You can quit the Google group. You can set it to no email. You can set it to digest. You could set it to read web only. So you'll have all sorts of choices that Google gives you about Google groups. And there will be more than just you guys in the study. Kat or Ruby, how many people overall have shown an interest now?
89.
Way to go.
This might be a little off the subject, but is there any other way to lower PPI besides exercise?
So one thing you want to do is increase PPI because it's
Oh,
too
you want
low.
to increase it? Okay.
Yep. So the way to increase it is exercise. That's the main way.
Okay.
There are two drugs that are being tried. One is sort of a sideways drug, this enzyme replacement therapy by Inozyme.
Right.
Raises it as a byproduct of something else called ENPP1. So there's some pathway thing going on. The other drug, the TNAP inhibitor, inhibits TNAP and so then raises PPI. The other way to do it would be to give people PPI. The amounts of PPI you'd have to give people are enormous. And so what we've been trying instead, and this, if you think about this, so, here's the ABCC6 gene. It's doing something to ATP that comes out of the cell. That ATP is converting something to PPI. Then there's some upregulation or downregulation of ENPP1 and a whole bunch of other things happen. This is like in the Krebs cycle, which, people studying medicine hate to learn because it's so big and long. It's a fundamental mechanism. And so what the drugs that are being tested are trying to do is get it earlier than just giving people PPI, which you'd have to constantly do. I mean, we're going to have to constantly do whatever we do, but in massive doses of PPI do not help until we get to a certain level of dose. So there will be some trials, I think, where people will try to just give people with PXE PPI. The other thing is that that PPI seems to be very variable in people. So some people who have low PPI have it lower than other people. Some people have it higher than other people. There are people with PXE whose PPI levels are normal, but they still have manifestations of PXE. So there's a lot of other things in the pathway that we need to figure out. as we go through this. We also don't know, like, does PPI change throughout the day? Like, is it lower in the morning or lower at night? And, that sort of thing. If we give people PPI, will it stay higher? We don't know that either. It seems that 1 dose a day in mice keeps it high the whole day. One upregulation through this enzyme drug in mice keeps it up all day. One TNAP inhibitor keeps it up all day. So in mice, the results have been very good, and they've actually prevented PXE from progressing in the mice with these 2 drugs and PPI, putting PPI in the water of the mice. So there's a lot of, we're in a great place finally. Only took us 28 years to get here, but we are in a place where we now have several things that could intervene. The other thing you might hear, and I should just say so that it doesn't confuse you, is PPI is actually used as a food additive.
Oh,
And so it's found in chocolate and sausage and Philadelphia cream cheese. It's found in highly processed stuff because it's the emulsifier that keeps those things from falling apart. But you would have to eat a tractor trailer truck full of sausage or chocolate in order to get 1 dose for the day. So it doesn't work. And it's broken down in the process of the cooking of whatever that substance is. So some people might say, oh, it's just a food additive. We're just going to eat a lot of whatever these things are. That won't work. So that's what we know so far.
okay. And that's not connected to the magnesium study you did before, or no?
No, so magnesium is somewhere in that long pathway. And, in mice, we showed that if we gave mice tons of magnesium, they seem to have alleviated some of the symptoms of PXE. We don't know what happens to PPI with magnesium.
Okay.
So
right.
That's something else that, for example, the people who enroll in the Daiichi Sankyo trial will probably have blood taken 7 times over 7 weeks or something, and that will be tested, PPI, magnesium. There'll be a whole bunch of things that will be tested in that process.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sharon, is PPI something that, I'm due for a blood test, a regular blood test? Is that something that your doctor could test for? No.
No, there's no commercial test for PPI. So this has also been a problem, that if you're tested by a research lab, let's say Jefferson, because that's our center, and then you get tested in France, there's no comparison between the 2 measures. There's no standard way to measure PPI, and it's not available. Like if you said Quest or LabCorp, can you test my PPI? They cannot. So it's a very special measure. Like people in general don't know their PPI levels. It's an interesting thing because you can imagine that these companies are interested in PPI because it causes mineralization, calcification, and there are jillions of common diseases, heart disease and so on, that are caused by calcification. So their hope is they'll solve this in PXE, but then they'll apply it to peripheral artery disease, heart disease, name the body part that calcifies, because there's a lot. They'll be using these for much more common conditions. And I think that's the hope, is they'll come in this way through the Orphan Drug Act and so on, and then they'll be able to apply it more broadly.
Well, that's good for us, finally.
Yep. It's the only reason we have a macular degeneration treatment, right, is because of the enormous numbers of people with macular degeneration. We didn't develop anti-angiogenesis shots in the eye. It was the communities that cared about aging baby boomers and macular degeneration. So yeah, so there are a number of aspects of PXE that I think that the general public's interested in, because the condition mimics so many normal aging processes, except in a more accelerated way. Okay, anything else?
I have a question. I apologize for being late. How do I get into the Google groups?
Yeah, so Ruby is going to give everybody who volunteered, so I guess 89 people so far, a email with everything you need to know to sign up in the registry and sign up for the Google group.
Are there any final questions? Well, we want to thank you guys for coming live. Like Sharon just mentioned, Ruby and I will be sending out an email with all the information you need to know, as well as regaging interest now that you guys know what you'll be doing in the study. Hopefully we'll have that out to you before the end of the week, so then you have the weekend, beginning of next, to really think about it before this officially launches. Ruby, do you have any final things to say?
No, thank you guys so much all for coming. Yeah, and listening to me talk for a while.
Oh,
Great. And I want to
Thanks.
thank you, Ruby, for considering this near and dear to my heart community as your internship project. So thank you.
Of course.
No, thank you. Thanks for answering all those questions also. So,
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, everyone.
okay.
Bye
Good to
bye.
see you.
Lovely to see faces again.
All right, guys, good job.
Thanks.